years ago, two economists from Colombia, Javier Salai Martin and Arvind Subramanian, wrote a very tendentious piece, at least it seemed, hyperbole of some significance, in which they argued that the government of Nigeria was fundamentally so incompetent that it was best if Nigeria didn't have a government. That if you just wrote a check, took oil receipts, and wrote a check to every Nigerian to the amount, the general welfare function of Nigerians will increase dramatically over the fact that there is a government administering the receipt of these monies. Now, of course, as a patriot, I was first very angry about it. Then I began to reflect more and more on this IMF working paper in 2003, I think it was. And the truth be told, in many oil-producing states or countries, an understanding of the effect is such that a certain month in the year, you get receipts from the government of a certain amount of money. It's done in Alaska, for example. It's done in the province of Alberta in Canada. And people get their receipts from oil money because people can probably more intelligently spend their money than somebody who is detached, you know, in this civic culture that Peter Eke describes and is there in Abuja, is using that same resource. Well, an interesting version of that came from an economist, a Norwegian economist. By the way, you know, Norwegians have been some of the best at managing the so-called resource curse. A Norwegian economist at Harvard at the time called Martin Sambu, he and I met up at a conference somewhere in Europe, and he had a modified version of it. He says, you know, what we should do is not necessarily send out the receipts because that's not practical, it's not. What we should do is write to every Nigerian and say, today the Nigerian government earned X billion. Your portion of it is Y $100,000 or whatever. But we have chosen to tax you at the rate of 99.99%. So here is your $100. The rest of it we have kept back as tax. Martin Sambu argues that that will have what he calls an endowment effect. That the people will know that this is actually their money that is being spent. That governor that has just passed the 30-car motorcade, including 2 ambulances, that is just wasting my money. And they will demand an accountability, you understand, accounting. I said to Martin, look, okay, let's stop this conversation. You will come to Nigeria. I flew him in and put him on Patito's gang to discuss this subject in 2005, I think it was. Martin Sambu is now actually one of the editors of the Financial Times. The point to make is that only an active citizenry can keep an elite that has lost its sense of mission from going further astray. That is the only thing that can save a people. And there are examples. I mean, one of the things that I fear, or I hear all the time, why foreign investors, I mean, let's not kid ourselves. As much as we like to gloss over these things, we all have seen the PwC report. Investors frightened to come to Nigeria. Even by African standards, with the size of our economy and all the possibilities, Nigeria is receiving far less investments than much smaller African countries because investors fear Nigeria. What are the reasons that investors fear Nigeria? Because the truth be told, in this federal arrangement where there's little consequence, a person makes a decision based on a sense of personal power, and those choices are debilitating of the environment. Nigeria is considered a terrible country for regulatory risk. Anybody who has power acts in a way, as a regulator, for example, that can do more damage to this economy than the worst enemy of the country can do, but is acting in a particular kind of interest. I was at Wharton some years ago, after some kind of major reform had taken place in Nigeria, and a major consultant from one of the major consulting firms was speaking, and he says, I have never seen a country wake up one morning, load a machine gun, and shoot itself in the foot. Nigeria just woke up one day and halved the value of its financial system. Those kinds of things happen because of this challenge in a federal arrangement in which power is used with very limited check. So we have a high level of, if you will, regulatory risk and such risks. And federalism is about containing those kinds of powers, about not letting one individual act with such limited checks and balances that they can, without meaning to be really so willfully damaging, do so much damage. And that happens consistently in Nigeria because the systems are weak, the institutions are weak. How do we deal with this? Interestingly, next year it will be 75 years since Nobel Prize winning economist started life as an Austrian, became British, and finished as an American. Friedrich von Hayek wrote the really troublemaking book, The Road to Serfdom. And he attacked on collectivism. And for me, it is a major contribution that we should be reflecting on as we look at what for me is obtuse collectivism, that we are acting in the interest of all, which is why I talked about the tragedy of the commons and the lottery effect as the main sub-themes of my conversation here. What has happened to us as a country is when somebody is distant from the consequence and is making a choice, we often act in the manner of that which belongs to all belongs to none. And if you think of it, Garrett Hardin, the biologist years ago, actually wrote the remarkable article, The Tragedy of the Commons, that improved our understanding of these things. Here's I was talking about game theory. Look, if this common field belongs to all of us to come and graze our cattle, every day we'll take our cattle there, and the cattle will eat until it is well fed. But one day the field will become Sahara because nobody is regrassing the field, and the cattle will begin to die. But if that field belonged to an individual, he will make sure that he replants the grass there because he will need his cattle to come back the next day. And one of the problems of a federal arrangement of a nature where people have all the power concentrated in one place and making choices without the responsibility for the consequence is that it's the tragedy of the commons writ large. And this is why it is important to begin to look more and more at the subsidiary effect, getting government off our backs, and therefore not traveling this path of a projected collectivism that is not really a collectivist arrangement, but an opportunity for people to take advantage to, in their own interest, advance their own interest in the name of advancing the interest of all. I think that the point I will make, and I'll begin to move quickly to a summation of my points of view, is that we have had challenges. And don't mind my books because I brought a couple of books to make a few points. We have had challenges that constantly move us towards the question of leadership responsibility in how our country evolves. The challenge for me is that a number of things converged in a way that has affected us. The coming together of soldiers and oil in centralizing things in our country, and the fact that we did not manage to get from the leadership elite that emerged during that period, has essentially left us in a direction in which a clear vision of where our country is going, a sense of one that cares for all, making everybody commit to the national thrust, has brought us to where we are, where people are just pulling and in our not understanding what the issues are, instead of using what leaders do to advance that cause, we